Hi, my name is Jeff Nair, and I'm going to be reviewing the book Teaching History with Film in this video. So, the overview of what I'll be going over in this video are the main ideas in the book. And so these include the issues in using film to teach history, as well as how to use film to develop historical empathy, and also developing analytical or interpretive skills. Additionally, we'll be talking about how you can use film to teach about controversial issues and also how you can use film to visualize the past and to understand and have your students understand certain historical narratives with film. So, the reason why you'd want to use film to teach history is that movies are just part of youth culture, and your students will be watching movies when they're in your class and much after they've taken your class. And so helping them to develop historical film literacy, or in other words, being able to critically analyze the films they see, will be able to help them to understand historical accuracies and inaccuracies. Additionally, when you're trying to teach certain subjects, film is helpful in being able to develop historical imagination and also helping students to understand the long-term consequences of historical events. So some of the issues that you will encounter if you do use film is that, of course, there are historical inaccuracies in the films, and so it's up to you to do research and understand the historical event that the film talks about. Also, you'll have to consider the fact that movies have long run times, and so you'll have to break up the movie over several days and even perhaps weeks if you're using other activities in it in conjunction with the film. Also, the films are obviously made to entertain, and they also have the film's creator's bias built into the film, and so you'll have to navigate those elements of the film that may not be historically accurate. And then, of course, you'll have to deal with the fact that films will contain objectionable material, and so you'll have to work with students and parents and also people in the school to be able to show certain films. So when you use film to teach history, you want to make sure you have a clear purpose or goal, and that the film fits in with your curriculum. And you'll want to make sure that you, as well as your students, are actively involved in viewing the film. So it's not just a passive thing. So that means having activities perhaps before, during, and after the film so that the students are actively engaged in viewing the film. So the first idea that's introduced is using film to develop historical empathy, and we'll talk about specifically empathy for caring, which means essentially that you're using a film to humanize a group of people for your students that they may not understand super well. And so the purpose of the film is to give your students a perspective of this individual or group of people. So the book uses the example of Gran Torino, which is Clint Eastwood's character, who's a retired auto worker, dealing with his neighbors who are the Hmong people from Southeast Asia. So also you can use film to develop empathy in terms of perspective recognition. And so this is your students' ability to understand people's decision making and their experiences in the past. And so you want to make sure that when you use a film to display this, that you use a film that has a youth character as the main protagonist and that there is a lot of information shown in the film of this character and their decision making. And so the example they use is Swing Kids, which is a film that talks about youth growing up in Nazi Germany and their varying experiences with the social and political aspects of their time. So using film to develop analytical or interpretive skills is using film either as a primary source or a secondary source. And so if you're using film as a primary source, you're using it to be able to represent certain values or attitudes of a certain historical time that you're talking about in your class. And so this will require you to do some research on the creation of the film and what people thought of the film at the time that it came out. And you'll also want to include other texts that reflect the attitudes and values that are portrayed in the film so that the attitudes and values that come out of the film are bolstered. So the example they use is the movie Bonnie and Clyde, which came out in the 60s. And so this film is good at portraying the values and attitudes of the 60s in terms of rebellion against the conservative authority figures of the time, and also the rampant violence going on, especially with the Vietnam War, and then also changing attitudes in terms of sexuality. Using film as a secondary source is essentially using the film to give an account of a historical person or event. And so this would be using the film as a text, such as a textbook or any other type of secondary source. And so you want to make sure that the film pretty much follows the historical account. And so this means that you'll have to do a lot of research on the historical subject to make sure that the film is being accurate. And so the example they use is the film The Alamo, which portrays pretty accurately the events that happened at the Alamo and certain historical figures that were present there. Now, using film to talk about controversial issues. So this is broken down into contemporary controversial issues and then issues that are found in history. So when you're using film to talk about a contemporary controversial issue, you want to make sure that whatever issue you're talking about, it's that there's a safe environment in the classroom so that you can have good discussion. And then also, you want to make sure that you show how what's portrayed in the film is connected to present issues. And so the example they use is the film The Jazz Singer, in which the main protagonist is an entertainer and he often uses blackface when doing his performance. And so you can use this film to show controversial issues with race at the time and how it's connected to current issues with race. Now, the other controversial issue or issues are the ones found just within history in general. And so you're using the film to show certain perspectives on the controversial issue in question and showing how this film has implications for our society today. Because usually these films do have a certain moral that they're trying to show that's connected to present day issues. And you want to make sure the students understand what that controversy is. And so the example that they use is the Kingdom of Heaven movie, and which shows the Crusades, and it shows a perspective of the Crusaders as well as the Muslims, and this connects to the conflicts between Westerners and Muslims today. And so this film is good at showing the controversial issue of history and how it's still relevant for our time. Now, also, you can use the film to be able to visualize the past, and what that means is essentially giving students some kind of context to the historical events that you're talking about. And so you want to make sure that when you're showing the film, you point out certain inaccuracies in the context of the event you're studying. And the students will have to have some kind of historical background before they view the film. And so the example they use is the film Glory, which shows the Black Regiment that fought for the North during the Civil War, and showing how certain events in the Civil War played out. And so this film is great in showing, being able to give your students historical imagination in terms of the Civil War. And now, finally, we'll be talking about how you can use film to be able to either visualize the past or use it as a certain historical narrative. And so, when you're using film to visualize the past in terms of a historical narrative, you are using it to basically challenge students' assumptions about a historical event. And so you want to make sure that you have what the book terms big questions for the students to focus on, or in other words, things that the movie portrays that may challenge students' understanding of historical events. And so the example they use is the movie Ride with the Devil, which shows how the protagonist joins with his Missouri bushwhackers in the Kansas-Missouri border issue with slavery. And the film shows a black man riding with some of these Missourians, and so students may question why this black man would ride with them when they're obviously pro-slavery. So the strengths and weaknesses of this book are essentially that the book gives detailed examples of each of the different ideas of using a film to teach about history. And they include lesson plans with all kinds of different assignments and other activities to bolster viewing the film. And at the end of each of the examples, the authors they cite the strengths and weaknesses of each of the lessons. Now, unfortunately, though, because they go into such detail, they don't have a large sample of examples, and they don't really have any kind of conclusive evidence about how to use film to teach history. And so you kind of have to take these examples with a grain of salt, and you kind of have to understand that you may have to adapt certain things from each of the lessons to your own classroom. Now, as part of how this book connects to ideas taught in our teaching methods in history and social science class is that it shows how the film is essentially part of a unit you would teach. And you would use the film as kind of the centerpiece of the unit, and then have other activities that help support the showing of the film and the ideas behind showing the film. And so you want to make sure that that these other activities help to uh, elaborate and show different perspectives and things when you're showing the film. So, is this book worth reading? I would argue that it is. I believe that the book helps you to have a better understanding of how you would use film to teach history. I mean, before I read this book, I had a general idea, but didn't really know how to make it effective. And I think the book does a good job of showing you that it is possible for film to be effective in the classroom. And I think it can help you to I think the book can give you inspiring ideas of how to use films that maybe you enjoy and depicts historical events or characters, and how to apply those films in your own classroom. And then I think this is a great book to have on your shelf as a reference guide to be able to understand, what to do in a certain situation when you want to use film, and you can just pull it off your shelf and give it a quick look. And that is the end of my review of this book, and I hope that you enjoyed it.